I shouldn't be writing this. Every instinct tells me to delete these words, to burn my laptop, to run as far as I can. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what happened at Site 17 and why 43 people vanished without a trace last Tuesday. I worked security at what we called a specialized containment facility. That's what we told our families, our friends. In reality, we housed things that shouldn't exist, things that defied explanation. But nothing prepared us for Subject L096, or as we came to call it, the Lonesome One. The facility itself was a marvel of modern engineering, buried deep within a mountain range that I'm no longer sure exists on any map. We had contained other entities before, things that crawled through walls, things that could bend time, things that wore human faces like masks. But we were always in control, always had protocols, always knew what we were dealing with. It started 3 months ago when a spelunking team went missing in the Carpathian Mountains. Standard procedure. We sent in a recovery team, expected to find bodies. Instead, they found something else. Something that made hardened special ops soldiers cry like children. The recovery team's initial radio contact still haunts me. I was manning the communications desk that night. Base, this is Echo 7. We found... Jesus Christ. The walls. The walls are covered in scratch marks, hundreds of feet up, like something's been trying to climb away from itself. Then static. When we re-established contact an hour later, 3 team members were already gone. The first photo showed a humanoid figure, impossibly tall and thin, crouched in the corner of a cave. Its arms were too long, stretching past its knees, ending in fingers like white spider legs. Its skin was a sickly pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over a frame that seemed more geometric than organic. But its face... God, its face. The recovery team's body cameras caught only glimpses. Those who saw the full image in person didn't survive long enough to describe it. We learned quickly. Don't look at its face. Not in photos, not in videos, not in real life. Even a fraction of a second was enough. Initial containment was a nightmare. We lost 17 personnel just getting it to Site 17. It never actively resisted. That was the strange part. It just walked where we guided it, face covered, crying that horrible cry. But anyone who accidentally glimpsed its face during transport... Well, we had to write a lot of letters to families that week. Letters that probably don't exist anymore. Dr. Marcus Wright led the containment efforts. He was brilliant, methodical, and completely unprepared for what would follow. It's not just that it kills you if you see its face, he told me during one of our late-night coffee breaks. It's like it needs to kill you, like your knowledge of its existence causes it physical pain. We kept it in a steel cube, 20 feet on each side, with no windows and only one heavily reinforced door. The walls were lined with lead and concrete 3 feet thick. Cameras monitored it 24/7, but only from the neck down. Any footage showing its face was immediately deleted, and the storage devices destroyed. The containment chamber itself was a testament to human paranoia. Triple-layered security systems, atmospheric pressure monitors, seismic sensors that could detect a mouse sneeze. We even installed a specialized white noise system to mask its cries. Not for its comfort, but for ours. The sound had a way of working into your dreams, making you wake up screaming about geometry that shouldn't exist. The Lonesome One never moved when we watched it. It just stood there, face covered by its hands, occasionally swaying slightly as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. But we could hear it. God, the sounds it made. Not quite crying, not quite screaming. Something in between. Something that made your soul want to curl up and die. Dr. Wright thought he had it figured out. It's not aggressive, he said. It's suffering. Every time someone sees its face, it's forced to hunt them down. It doesn't want to, but it has to, like an immune response gone wrong. He was partially right, but he missed something crucial. The incident happened during a routine feeding. We'd lower meat through a special chute, whole cows usually. The lonesome one never touched them while we watched, but they'd always be gone the next day. This time, though, something went wrong. The chute jammed. Private Cooper was new, young, eager to prove himself. He volunteered to fix it manually. We warned him about the face, gave him a welding mask with a narrow slit to see through. Everything was going fine until he dropped his wrench. The sound echoed through the chamber. The lonesome one stopped its swaying. For the first time since its containment, it moved while being watched. Its head snapped toward the sound with a crack that reminded me of breaking trees. Cooper didn't mean to look. It was instinct. Just a quick glance up through that narrow slit in his mask. The scream that followed wasn't human. It wasn't the lonesome one's usual cry either. It was both of them somehow, a duet of agony that made the steel walls vibrate. Cooper fell from the platform, his mask clattering away. The lonesome one's hands dropped from its face. I looked away immediately, but others weren't so lucky. Through the security feed, I could see its body unfold like a twisted origami, joints bending in impossible ways as it crossed the 20-foot space in a single bound. The camera went dark after that, but the sounds... Christ, the sounds. When backup arrived, the containment door was still sealed. Inside, we found nothing. No blood, no bodies, just Cooper's mask and an empty room. The lonesome one was gone, and so were the 12 people who had seen its face through the security feeds. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because the lonesome one had learned something new. It could be seen through cameras, and somewhere out there, footage of its face existed. Security cameras, phone videos, satellite images, and it needs to eliminate every single person who might see them. The containment breach was just the beginning. Over the next week, people started disappearing. A traffic camera operator in Belgrade, a satellite technician in Houston, a teenager who happened to be browsing Google Earth images of the Carpathian Mountains. The disappearances followed a pattern we'd seen before, but never on this scale. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just empty rooms and chairs still warm from bodies that were there moments before. Sometimes we'd find strange marks on the walls or ceiling, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, like scars in reality itself. Dr. Wright worked frantically to understand what was happening. He developed a theory. The lonesome one existed simultaneously in multiple places, hunting all who had seen its face at once. It didn't travel. It simply was. Distance meant nothing. Time meant nothing. If you saw its face, it would come for you. Period. The last time I saw Dr. Wright was 2 days ago. He was in his office, surrounded by papers covered in complex equations and desperate scribblings. "I figured it out," he said, his eyes wild with fear and excitement. "It's not hunting them because they saw its face. It's hunting them because they made it real. Observation collapses the quantum wave function. Every time someone sees it, they force it to exist in our reality, and it can't bear that existence." He was about to tell me more when his computer chimed. A new email. An attachment. He opened it without thinking. I heard that familiar duet of screams as I ran from his office. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Now I'm sitting here, writing this warning. Because people need to know, need to understand. But I've already said too much, described too much. With every word, I risk creating a mental image clear enough to... Wait. I hear something in the hallway. Footsteps, but wrong somehow. Like too many joints bending in ways they shouldn't. And crying. That horrible, beautiful crying. They found my previous document saved on a blood-streaked laptop in Site 17's eastern corridor. I survived that night, but only because I learned something crucial. The lonesome one can't stand to look at itself. Even its own reflection causes it unbearable pain. That's why it keeps its face covered. That's how I escaped. I remember every second of that encounter. The way it unfolded into the room, joints crackling like static electricity. The way its fingers, too many fingers, scraped against the walls. I should have died. But I caught a glimpse of my badge's reflective surface and, in desperate inspiration, ripped it off and held it up. The creature recoiled so violently, it left dents in the reinforced ceiling. While it writhed, hands clawing at its own face, I ran. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what happened after Dr. Wright disappeared, and why I believe this thing isn't just hunting individuals anymore. It's hunting our entire reality. The first clue came from the pattern of disappearances. They weren't random. The lonesome one wasn't just taking people who had seen its face. It was systematically eliminating every trace of its own existence. Scientists who had studied it, guards who had monitored it, even people who had only heard detailed descriptions. But here's the terrifying part. With each person it took, the memories of those around them began to change. It wasn't just that people disappeared. It was like they were being retroactively erased from existence. I noticed it first with Dr. Wright's family. When I called his husband to explain the disappearance, he had no idea who I was talking about. Their wedding photos showed him standing alone. Their children, I remember playing with them at company picnics, had never existed. The family dog, a German shepherd named Tesla that Dr. Wright had rescued, was gone too. Not just gone, there was no record of the shelter he'd adopted him from. The lonesome one wasn't just killing people, it was unmaking them. That's when I started documenting everything, every detail, every memory, every scrap of evidence I could find. I knew I was painting a target on my back, but someone had to remember. Someone had to know. The second breakthrough came from Dr. Wright's final research. In his last days, he had been studying quantum mechanics, specifically the observer effect. He believed the lonesome one existed in a state of quantum superposition, both real and unreal simultaneously, until someone observed it. Each observation forced it into a single state of existence, causing it immense pain. His office was a maze of equations and theories. One whiteboard caught my attention. A complex diagram showing multiple realities intersecting like soap bubbles. In the margins, he'd written, "It bleeds through the weak points," places where reality isn't quite solid. Caves, mirrors, digital spaces, anywhere reflection and recursion create instability in the universe's rendering. But it went deeper than that. In his notes, he theorized that the lonesome one wasn't from our reality at all. It was something that had slipped through the cracks between dimensions, a being that was never meant to exist in our universe. Every observation, every memory of it, every piece of evidence that it existed was like an anchor, forcing it to remain in a reality that rejected its very existence. That's why it hunts so relentlessly. It's not just killing out of malice or hunger. It's trying to free itself from our reality by eliminating every trace of its existence. I found surveillance footage from the night of the initial containment breach. It took me hours to work up the courage to watch it, making sure to keep my finger on the pause button at all times. What I saw changed everything. The lonesome one didn't just disappear with its victims. It seemed to fold space around itself, creating impossible geometries that hurt to look at. The people it took didn't die. They were pulled into whatever space exists between realities. In one frame, I saw through a gap it created. What I glimpsed there, imagine looking at a photograph negative of the universe, where void and matter are reversed, and everything that should be straight runs in curves that make your brain itch. But the most chilling detail was in the audio. Playing it at 0.25 speed, beneath the screams and the sound of tearing metal, I could hear words. The lonesome one was speaking. Please forget. Please let me go. Please let me not be. That's when I understood the true horror of our situation. We weren't dealing with a monster that wanted to kill us. We were dealing with something that wanted desperately to stop existing, but couldn't as long as anyone remembered it. The disappearances have been accelerating. Last week, an entire archive department vanished because they had stored documents relating to the lonesome one. Yesterday, a military base went dark after receiving a transmission containing surveillance footage from Site 17. The base didn't just empty, it never existed. Maps show empty desert where I know there were buildings, fences, lives. The government is trying to cover it up, of course. But how do you hide something that erases the evidence of its own existence? How do you contain a being that can appear anywhere someone remembers it? I've started noticing other changes too. Small things at first. Street names that were different than I remembered. Buildings that seemed to have always been there, but I knew were new. Then bigger things. Species of birds I'd never seen before, but everyone else treated as common. Historical events that no one else remembered the same way. Reality is becoming fluid, malleable. The lonesome one's attempts to unmake itself are having ripple effects through the fabric of existence itself. I'm writing this from a small cabin in northern Maine. No internet, no phone service. Just me, this laptop, and enough supplies to last a month. I've covered all the mirrors and reflective surfaces. The windows are blacked out. I've set up motion sensors around the perimeter. But I know it's not enough. Because here's the real truth. The thing that keeps me awake at night. I think the lonesome one is getting stronger. Each person it takes, each memory it erases, makes it easier for it to affect our reality. The boundaries between what is and what isn't are breaking down. Yesterday, I found a photo of my high school graduation. I was standing alone in the picture, even though I know I had friends and family there. This morning I tried to call my father, but his number doesn't exist. When I checked social media, I couldn't find any trace of him. The family albums in my backpack are slowly emptying, photographs fading to blank paper before my eyes. It's not just hunting individuals anymore. It's unraveling the very fabric of our reality, thread by thread, memory by memory. The worst part? I'm starting to forget things too. Basic things. The name of my first pet, the color of my childhood home, the face of my mother. Are these normal memory lapses, or is something systematically erasing my past? I can hear it now, in the distance. That familiar cry that sounds like every sad song in the world played at once. The motion sensors haven't gone off, but I know it's coming. Maybe it's already here. Maybe it's been here all along, waiting for me to finish this document, to create one final perfect record of its existence that it needs to erase. To anyone reading this, I'm sorry. By sharing this knowledge, I've put you at risk. But maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe the only way to stop this is to spread the knowledge so far and wide that it can never be completely erased, to anchor it so firmly in our reality that it has no choice but to... The document ends here. The laptop was found in an abandoned cabin in Maine. Its screen cracked, but still functioning. The authorities have no record of anyone renting or owning the cabin. Local residents claim it has been empty for decades. When asked about Site 17, the government denies its existence. There are no records of a doctor. Right, no missing persons reports matching the described disappearances. The only evidence that any of this happened is this document, and the faint sound of crying that some say can be heard in empty rooms, just at the edge of hearing, like someone trying desperately not to exist.